and get to our particular topic for today. I'm not exactly sure how this conversation is going to go. There's really no organizational pattern, so we can kind of like hit on some points. So, what I want to do is I kind of want to just to take it to the expert and kind of so Amanda, I know, look, you're more so than us, most certainly, right? So the only thing that I know what's going on with this particular incident is Activision Blizzard is currently in a lawsuit with the state of California, I believe, over a long tradition of sexism in the industry. And actually, I read a recent article where they talked about how there maybe some of the people were like were shredding evidence and that sort of hiding evidence of this as well. So they're kind of even getting in more hot water over that. So I kind of want to just take it over to you and kind of just get a good idea of what's going on in this particular controversy.
Yeah, so it's actually really interesting we're talking about this week because, of course, the lawsuit broke about a month ago, but some new recent updates came out this week, which are really interesting. But background, basically, Activision Blizzard is being sued by California, the California Department of Fair Housing and Employment. And then they're actually facing a second lawsuit from their own shareholders because the California DFHE has been investigating them for 2 years, and apparently they did not report this to their shareholders, who are now quite angry at the company's losses that have been sustained since they didn't disclose this info. So they're facing two separate lawsuits. But the one that most people know about, the lawsuit from the state of California, is based on all the journalists keep using this phrase, the frat boy culture that Activision Blizzard not encouraged, that was occurring in Activision Blizzard. And I don't love that phrase because I think it really minimizes how terrible a place to work this was, according to the reports coming out in this lawsuit. So I prefer thinking of it as they're being sued by the state of California for sustaining a workplace that allowed for really egregious harassment of, in particular, female employees.
Yeah, excellent. So obviously, it's not just the gaming industry that's sort of been accused of this toxic atmosphere, but like social media companies like Facebook and that sort of thing. Obviously, we can kind of dive into sort of like the toxic masculinity involved in this particular. But I didn't know if anyone wanted to jump in with some questions or anything.
I have, as you can tell, I'm wearing my Hearthstone hat, and I actually have a Hearthstone T-shirt. I have been a fan of Blizzard since I can remember. I mean, B and Z go back to our GameStop days. And I mean, I played World of Warcraft ever since 2005. I've been playing Hearthstone since 2014 when it came out. And to hear this and to see what's going on, and I brought this up last week when Lindsay was on. Like, there are some terrible people in this company. They're terrible people that did this, that allowed this to happen. I'm not mad at the Blizzard name. Like, I'm not mad at the Blizzard name. Like, this is just something that's happened under the Blizzard name. I'm extremely upset with the people who have done this and who have acted in this way. And I mean, it's ridiculous. And I mean, let's be honest, the higher ups that are looking at this they've never played a video game in their life. They have no idea what's going on. All they care about is how quickly they can line their pockets with cash. And that's unfortunate. I mean, even J. Allen Brack stepped down because of this. And I mean, he wasn't my favorite guy. I mean, Mike Morhaime was my favorite guy back, years ago before he stepped down. But I have invested so many years of my life into Blizzard games. And I just, like, part of me goes, do I just stop? Do I just walk away? Do I just leave it all behind and say, you know what, screw this? There are plenty of other games out there that I can thoroughly enjoy, Or do I stick with it and hope and pray that things get better and that things are taken care of the way they should be taken care of, and eventually it will be better. But over the past 5 years, it's just kind of been on this steady decline of this is not going well. So I'm kind of curious about what Amanda thinks of, like if you were in my shoes, what would Amanda do? Let's ask that question.
I've been in your shoes. I don't know first if I'm quite as willing to kind of let higher ups or assume that this is a higher up problem rather than a systemic problem, but that's a different thing. But having a game company whose product.
Oh no!
Oh, she froze. Like right, and like look at that face too.
Just like right when she was getting to something good too.
I know.
Right when she was.
She was about to unveil the secret.
You love and have invested a ton of.
Oh, she's back. Oh. You froze.
All right, am I back? Yeah.
We got none
Sorry,
of that.
There it is. It pops up my internet connection is unstable after I've frozen because Zoom's really helpful.
Okay.
No, I could still hear all of you, so I knew I froze. I've been in that situation because Blizzard is not the only company who's faced this. Of course, Riot faced a similar lawsuit in 2018, and Ubisoft has faced I believe a couple of these at this point. And Assassin's Creed is one of my favorite game series of all time. And so to find out that this company who, puts this disclaimer on all of their games, like this game was made by a group of people of diverse backgrounds and beliefs and ethnicities, and then find out that they had this kind of horrible workplace culture going on was devastating. And it's been really interesting to hear industry members' takes on this as well. A lot of devs say don't boycott the products because at this point, they've already put their heart and soul into them. They worked through these toxic conditions to make the products. They're still proud of what they did. They're still proud of the games themselves. So some people say that. Others say things like a boycott and a loss of profits is going to be the thing that makes game companies change their behavior. So I think it's a decision we all kind of have to make on our own.
Because I'm kind of on the fence. Like, it wasn't the majority of the company that was doing all this. It was just this, this small group of idiots, that decided this is how we're going to act when we're at work, and we're going to get drunk, and we're going to, do whatever inappropriate. It's ridiculous. So the people, especially the females in that, have definitely put their heart and soul into this game and are not getting paid what they should be paid, or not getting the respect that they should be. And one of my family members is actually female on the Hearthstone team, and I haven't heard from her. She's like distant, super distant, like step cousin twice removed. So I talk to her like once a year. But it's those people that I'm just kind of like, I don't want to give up on you. I'm not giving up on you. I want to support you, but at the same time, your coworkers are complete dog crap. Like what do it's kind of like, what do you do? So
I think that brings up an interesting question, though, Amanda. And I feel like you wanted to kind of address this, and that is, I think it's important to say that maybe this isn't just a couple of bad apples, but maybe this is more of a systemic problem. So the atmosphere of the particular company has been allowing this, and the fact that no one has really, I'm sure people have tried to speak up about what's been going on, but there was really no checks and balances. But yeah, so I want, if you wanted to address that.
Yeah. So the thing about the few bad apples phrase that everyone always forgets is that the full phrase is a few bad apples spoil the bunch. Like, even if it is the action of a small group of bad apples, they spoil the whole bunch. And I do firmly believe that issues in video games usually are the actions of a small group of negative people. I believe this in terms of like who harasses female gamers. Whenever I talk to female gamers, they always emphasize it's a small group of people. But darn, those people are vocal and they can ruin the whole experience, even if the majority of people are good. So that the fact that that phrase like, oh, it's only a few bad apples, kind of negates the impact of the bad apples. But yes, I do see this as kind of those bad apples not being removed or penalized for their behavior is the systemic problem. So it's not that everyone in gaming is terrible. Would never say that. Most people in gaming are great. But bad behavior is allowed to kind of persist in that small group without being dealt with effectively, and then that ends up having these like really strong, broader systemic impacts. And I see this in this particular topic kind of coming from two places. One's the structure of the games industry. It's a hard industry to work in. It's hard to have a say because it's very tenuous contract-based work. Game workers aren't unionized, for instance, so there's not a lot of power for one individual game person. And then the other influence, I would say, is kind of the expectation of who we think of as gamers, this kind of strong in-group versus out-group mentality and how that plays out around things like gender. So these two forces, I think, are what make these issues really bad.
Yeah, excellent. And this reminds me of another particular, so CrossFit in a lot of ways, the controversy I had surrounded about CrossFit reminds me a lot about that. And I'll kind of get into that here in a little bit, but I do want to give like Matt Z a chance to say anything or ask any questions that you might have.
Oh, yeah. So that like the damage has been done. It's here now. So in that case, what does it take to fix? Like in your opinion, at least, you don't have to speak for the majority. For you, what would it take to kind of undo this? I mean, they're slowly beginning to acknowledge it. From what I understand, they've actually removed Jesse McCree's name. It is no longer canon because he was named after one of the people who was apparently involved. I mean, is that the right step? I mean, like, what else would it take to kind of like win back the trust of everybody here?
So I think improvements for all workers in the industry is one of the steps that's needed here. So the video game industry is project-based. A lot of people get hired for certain stages of projects. They're on contract rather than full-time employees, and then they move to another company. And so there's a lot of turnover, there's a lot of tenuousness, and not a lot of stability. And people who work in games do it because they love games. And so there's always kind of more workers than there are positions. So this makes it really hard to have security in your job, to push back against your employers because you're there to make the games you love. And so I think a lot of game workers have been pushing for collective bargaining. They've been pushing for kind of an industry-wide union like the Screen Actors Guild or the Writers Guild of America, something that would cover them as they move from position to position. So that's definitely an option. And I think we also need to keep redefining what counts as games, right? Because a lot of this is this idea that gamers meet a certain set of gatekeeping criteria, game industry workers meet a certain set of gatekeeping criteria, and others are outsiders, and therefore we don't have to let them in our clubhouse. And so changing that culture as well and recognizing that gaming is already broader than it used to be and already includes a lot more people is going to be kind of the other step.
Yeah, and you talk about this in your book a lot, Gaming Sexism, this idea that casual games are often considered to be less than, right? And when they become sort of associated or coded as feminine, then what you end up doing is you associate femininity with unauthentic, right? So challenging sort of the authenticity of gaming. So there's almost like this pushback against that. So, but yeah, excellent, very good. Jeremy, I want to give you a chance to ask any questions or say anything about this particular controversy.
Yeah, I've got a couple questions. So one, do you think this kind of behavior is like a holdover or a remnant from sort of the behavior that happened in tech companies, like the early days of Silicon Valley, or is it something inherent to gaming?
I think a lot of it is still a holdover of our expectations. So I've done some work on the games industry with one of my grad students, Brandon Harris. And one of the things we find that's really interesting is when people talk about the industry, they have this kind of nostalgia for its early Silicon Valley roots, like a bunch of guys in their garage working on something they love. That phrase, like a bunch of guys in their garage, comes up kind of over and over and over again. And so I think one of the things we concluded is that because people have this nostalgia for perhaps this innovative, creative, unregulated era of the industry, they actually often resist some of the formal policies that would make their lives as workers easier. I won't say easy. No work is ever easy. But for instance, some of them don't love having HR departments and the other kinds of trappings of corporate life because they feel like it separates them from this creative space. So I think a lot of it is a holdover of we're a creative industry. We just want to work on things we love. We're not corporatized. And I would hope that as the industry kind of continues to come into its own and recognize that it already is an industry, some of that will go away.
Yeah, I've kind of always thought of it more as like a prolonged adolescence, more so than an actual creative thing. Um, yeah, do you know the gender demographics at Activision?
Not off the top of my head. The
Did the article
industry,
say it was 20% female?
it may have. The industry itself is about that, about 80% male, but the distribution of gender across different roles is also an interesting thing. Programming, coding, kind of the hard tech roles are 90 to 100% male. The soft roles perhaps, or the non-game roles such as PR and marketing, that's where you find most female employees. So that has a lot to do with kind of how we socialize people towards games, the fact that the people who grow up playing games, love games, want to work in games tend to be men. But that distribution between the people making the games hands-on and then the people promoting the games has some interesting gender elements to it.
I think that kind of plays along with a narrative that you hear a lot in terms of like the myth of like the white male genius that you see a lot in media, in terms of like we saw how we idolize figures like Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk as these like these creative geniuses that are sort of pushing the industry with sort of progressing, creating these new technologies and kind of framing it as sort of like the standard of what it means to be a genius, or what it means to actually create things. So I think it kind of ties into that as well. What do you think about that? Oh, no one.
I'm gonna see if anyone else has an answer for that one
I'm
first.
not really sure I followed, actually. I don't know if I made the jump with you.
Oh, okay. I guess I'm kind of speaking out of turn. So no, just this idea, like this myth. Whenever we do frame particular white males as these geniuses, so like Mark Zuckerberg, Bill Gates, this idea that it becomes almost like this myth that gets perpetuated.
So you're saying that's why those people, like in certain roles, were predominantly male?
No, I'm just saying it sort of ties into that. It gets perpetuated in media. So
So you're saying that just the media focuses more solely on the Elon Musks of the world and the Bill Gates of the world rather than,
I mean, look at superheroes, for instance. Of course, we're having this big resurgence, especially now that Disney's being more proactive about representation, because we have Shang-Chi coming out this week. But before, there's the big things like Spider-Man, white, Fantastic Four, white, Superman, white, Batman, white males. Just so I kind of see what he's saying. It's just that, like I said, we kind of idolize these, and as the culture begins to grow, believe it or not, we're slowly becoming more aware of other cultures, and that, hey, it's not all about the white savior. Hell, white Jesus. I mean, seriously. It's I see what he's saying.
Maybe I didn't explain it very well. So it's kind of
I don't disagree. It's just the link to what we were talking about. I didn't follow the link.
Well, let me kind of explain what I'm talking about. 'Cause sometimes I don't explain things very well. So it kind of ties into this idea of the meritocracy, right? So we tend to think of those that are successful as those who deserve their success, and we often ignore the sociocultural factors that led to that, right? And we ignore the barriers. So whenever we kind of paint these people as like the successful people, like the Elon Musks, the Mark Zuckerbergs, we ignore all these sociocultural factors that contributed to their success. The fact that they're, white in the United States, they're male, there's all the other barriers for marginalized communities. They were all born in wealthy families. But then what ends up happening is, in a meritocracy, we say, oh, these are successful people and they're all white males. So we perpetuate this idea that only white males can be successful, or there's some sort of like inherent superiority to that. That's kind of what I'm talking about. I know I didn't explain that very well. Hopefully I kind of cleared it up a little bit. I don't know.
I think that actually kind of links back to the point Jeremy made about the video game industry still kind of being in its adolescence. Like, if we think about it, video games are at most 60 something ish years old. Like, there's some argument over what the first video game was. It's like a analog one made at Brookhaven National Laboratories, Nuclear Research Lab in Long Island. Tennis for
Space
Two.
Force, is that what it's called?
No, so Tennis for Two was actually first, but it was an analog computer game, not a digital computer game. And it was created in 1958. It was kind of like put together for a Visitors Day thing to give kids something fun to play with while they visited the nuclear research lab. And then it was taken apart and kind of forgotten about. Space War is the second kind of contender for first video game. And so that came out in 1961, 1962. But if we think about where these games were made, you know, a national research laboratory or Massachusetts Institute of Technology, you know, who had access to the computers in those spaces. And so games kind of grew up out of certain spaces and haven't really existed long enough to completely grow out of that. So I think both of your points actually kind of pull together pretty nicely there.
And what ends up happening is diversity almost gets framed as this attack against sort of authenticity of the field, right? Because of that, in a lot of ways. When we talked about the crisis of authority, right? When we had diversity, very good, excellent. All right. Any other questions? Anyone want to ask any other questions or kind of mention anything else about this particular?
Yeah, I have one. So I mean, there's a lot of different angles of sexism in gaming, from, you know, in the actual industry and just in, you know, people who are gamers. Is there like a distinction? So the people in Activision, like, they were doing this in person, right? I mean, they pushed that lady to kill herself. But a lot of the online stuff is done under the, you know, shield of anonymity. So, you know, it just seems like a different level of psychopathy to do something in person, like, versus some troll, you know, who's on Reddit.
So the kind of, I'm having to think about that for a second. So I think it's like a two-prong attack, right? So obviously you have industrial factors, but then you also have cultural factors. You have individual communities that are also reinforcing these sexist, racist, toxic elements in the culture itself. So it's almost like like I said, like a two-prong approach, right? You got the industry perpetuating racism and sexism, like in terms of like representation in the game, but also in the industry and creating barriers. But then you also have the communities themselves that are also policing what's going on in this particular instances. I mean, Gamergate is the great example, right? So Gamergate would be an example of the gaming community acting in a reactionary way, policing legitimate complaints about sexism in gaming, right? And how toxic that was, right? Which is, you know, it's kind of different from the Activision controversy in a lot of ways, right? But there's sort of the similar kind of the components to it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think this is kind of why the phrase frat boy culture has been picked up so much to talk about the Activision lawsuit, Activision Blizzard lawsuit, even though I already discussed why I object to that phrase being the one everybody picked up. Because in many ways, people think of gaming culture as a kind of adolescent frat boy culture. Like, oh, you're trash talking, but it's just part of the game. You're saying all of these things, but it's part of the culture. It's accepted. And there's actually some really interesting research, not enough of it to say this definitively, but there's some research that suggests, like, if you have a community, even an anonymous one online, that polices its norms and doesn't say things like trash talk or sexism or racism are acceptable, people will start to fall in line with those norms, and it'll be a positive space, even though it's anonymous. Again, there's like only a couple studies that have looked at this because very few people have put the time and energy into policing anonymous online communities. And so they've kind of let whatever culture grows grow. And I think game companies are dealing with that now that they've kind of tapped out their more traditional market and are looking to expand. They're like, oh shoot, we let this kind of negative trash talk type of culture where anything goes grow. How do we deal with it now? And so I think that that idea of like what you let, I'm not phrasing this pretty well, but like what you allow to grow in a culture can then bleed into the workplace if your workplace is in that culture, and vice versa.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, so I guess if you're the group reinforcement is the main factor, then not necessarily the, that you're doing this to someone in front of you versus.
Yeah, it's still hard to believe that this is like things that people did to their coworkers. Like, it's devastating to read the full report and what was going on. But I would say that, like, oh, sorry.
Would it be appropriate to talk about, because I'm actually not very familiar with any of the individual incidents. Not that we need it to validate why this was wrong or anything, but can we talk about? Can we give an example of a particular incident that happened? Like, once again, we don't need. I mean, it's not necessary to to say like things need to change, but I don't know. Maybe this could kind of give some perspective. Because if we just kind of frame it as everybody was sexist or that sort of thing, then it's easy for people to kind of ignore it. But if we can kind of give an example of something that happened, maybe we can kind of just frame this as, hey, look, this is a lot more serious than maybe you thought. I don't know if anyone knew of any particular incident.
The article that I read, and it's kind of vague, but mentioned that some of the male employees would come in being proud that they were hungover. They would also drink at work heavily, something to do with them crawling under desks and like physically touching the female workers and talking down to them. And they'd come in, like I said, hungover, and then give all their work that they were supposed to be doing themselves to those female employees. So the article kind of mentioned a lot of that kind of stuff that was going on.
Yeah, I think that highlights the two trends actually really well. If we're going back to talking about like the structure of the industry and then kind of gender norms in gaming culture, passing off all your work to other employees is kind of an industry deregulation, like lack of oversight type of thing. And then having it occur in gendered ways and also being accompanied by sexual harassment of those female employees, we're kind of getting at both this idea of like, well, women aren't insiders in game culture, so who cares how we treat them? And then also this kind of idea of video game industry jobs perhaps needing to be a little bit more structured and grow beyond, as Jeremy phrased it earlier, their adolescence in some ways.
Yeah, excellent. Very good. Does anyone else want to ask you questions about this particular controversy? Ask Amanda any question?
Not about this particular controversy, but I am kind of curious to know. So we talked about the companies that have had, issues like this in the past. But as far as sexism in the actual games themselves are concerned, I would like to bring up Rockstar and Grand Theft Auto and those types of games that have these types of scenarios in the actual game themselves. And why aren't we seeing more of these types of things brought to light, going, hey, why are you allowed to put this in the actual game itself and that be okay, but then, and that be accepted, but this is not accepted, you kind of see what I'm saying here? Like, it's, why are they, I guess my question is, why are they allowed to do that? What makes it different?
So, to my understanding, I'm not defending Rockstar or Grand Theft Auto or anything. Is that Grand Theft Auto does it in? I actually never played it, to tell you the truth either. They do it in a satirical sense, so it's quote unquote okay, and that's kind of how they get away with it. Because Grand Theft Auto 5 up to this point is more so like a satire on modern American culture and capitalism. So I guess that's kind of how they get away with it.
Or all those kids playing it, viewing it as a satire.
Exactly. It's like, let me.
I own Grand Theft Auto.
Mm-hmm.
It's there are some things in that game that are very entertaining and very fun to do, but then you get to certain parts and you're like, how did that even make it into this? Like, why is this okay?
Yeah.
Like, why do I need to do this in order to progress? You know, like that just throws you for a loop. I was like, that can't be okay in the grand scheme of things when you're making these games. Like, you can make those types of really hardcore, adult, or mature games without that stuff. I mean,
Like,
come on.
where, like, by this point, where's the line?
Yeah, exactly. Where does the line? Where's the line?
Oh, it's
drawn?
digital media. It's art, right? There's that big debate. It's like, is art video games art?
Yeah.
It's like that's how they quote unquote pass it off. So.
Well, I think, and I'm sure Amanda will be able to answer this even better than me. But I can tell you for a fact that scholars have been complaining about the representation in games for a very, very long time, right? So it's not like it's been sort of like ignored. I mean, video game scholars have been complaining about representation, particularly when it comes to the representation of women in video games for a very, very long time, all the way back to Lara Croft and that sort of thing, right? The sexualization of women in video games. Obviously, we can kind of pinpoint it to these are men creating these games, and they're creating with them for like men in mind, right? So this idea that there's an assumption that women aren't going to want to play this game, so we can
But is it that, and I'm not trying to defend this, is it that, or do they have the statistics saying, well, we've been doing this, and the sales have been doing this when we do this, but if we change it, then are the sales going to do this, because now we're not going towards our audience that we were going to, and now we're trying to be more diverse, and the main audience that that we're usually catering to doesn't want that, and so they're not going to buy our game. So I mean, yes, we want diversity in games, but from their standpoint, yeah, it sounds like a good idea, but why do it when the lines
what we're doing is just fine?
Our
yearly Call of Duty game is fine. Yeah,
Call of Duty's been the same thing for the last 15 years. I mean, it's never changed, and I don't see it ever changing. The graphics get better. I mean, that's maybe a new storyline. But yeah.
I do want to give Amanda a chance to answer this question.
We've touched on so
she
many
had a
things.
look on her face.
Read a response theory. No, you're definitely right. Like the video game industry, if we look at something like video game budgets, they have skyrocketed as people have focused on better graphics, longer play times, being more involved, etc. And so video gaming as an industry is super risk averse. Sometimes I think that they're all still like recovering from 1983 when everything crashed and like Atari closed and had to bury ET in a landfill.
Poor ET.
So doing what has worked is a solid business strategy. That's why we keep getting Call of Duties, because people keep buying them. But there is some evidence that shows that doing anything minimal to target broader audiences actually is beneficial. So I'm thinking like Mass Effect 3 put both male Shepard and female Shepard on the cover. That's a very small nod to people who play femshep, female audiences.
Or even Assassin's Creed with Alexios and Cassandra.
Exactly. The first Assassin's Creed to have both male and female main characters outsold previous ones.
Yeah.
And so these or Dragon Age Origins, which has a trans character, is one of the best selling games in that franchise. And so when I talk to female gamers about this, and I talk to a lot of female gamers, they never say like, you can't make another Call of Duty. They never say, we don't want the games that are already out there. They say, we want some knowledge that people are also thinking of us. One of my participants had this great line about it, because I expected them to like be upset about how sexually objectified female characters are. And they really weren't, unless it was like armor that didn't logically make sense in the situation, like armor that doesn't protect your vital organs. They were mad about that. Fighting in high heels, that one was annoying. But one of them said this line that really stuck with me. She said, like, sex is fine, porn is fine, but why do I always have to look like a porn star in every game I play? So it's not that she wanted all of those objectified characters gone. It's that she also occasionally wanted other options. And so that's the thing, is like, there is some evidence that says nodding to a diverse audience is actually good for business. And then there's also this thing that says you don't have to stop doing what you're doing, you don't have to stop including all of the things that appeal to your current audience. You just also like sometimes show that maybe you've thought of other people too.
Yeah, and that's why I kind of appreciate like the Bethesdas of the world, you know, with their Elder Scrolls. Like you have your set race, and then you can manipulate your character however you want. You can make them look however you want, even to the point. I think what was it? Oh, so we were talking about Cyberpunk a few months ago. I mean, as glitchy as that game was, when you create your character in Cyberpunk, I mean, they have a dong slider. I mean, that is how detailed they get. Okay, like it is ridiculous. So I kind of agree. I think there should be more options as far as like character customizations. But you know, if you want to leave the main character the same name, it's fine. You know, whatever. But let's get those options instead of just going, all right, here's the guy, here's the girl. You pick, you know. Let's get some more options in there.
Or here's the guy and here's the other guy and you pick,
here's the other
which
guy.
has been a lot of gaming history.
Yep. Yeah, excellent.